Welcome to M&A Science Live, where leading M&A practitioners share lessons learned from their experience. When you use proven techniques in M&A, more value is created. If you're interested in keeping up with the latest from M&A Science, visit mascience.com and subscribe to our newsletter. Again, that's mascience.com. I'm your host, Kison Patel, CEO and founder of M&A Science and Deal Room. Joining me today is Jeff Bender, CEO at Harris. Today, we're going to talk about how to manage M&A on a high scale. How are you doing today, Jeff?
Very well, thank you.
Can we kick things off, Jeff, with a little bit about your background and M&A experience?
Absolutely. I've been with Harris and Constellation. I'll use those sort of two interchangeably for actually, believe it or not, over 20 years. I was sort of preparing, and I looked at the calendar. I was like, "Wow, it has actually been a long, long time." I joined Harris as its director of finance after starting my working career at Deloitte, one of the big accounting firms. So I'm a CPA by background. That's my sort of education. One of my first learnings when I joined Harris was, even though I sort of fancy myself as quite a reasonable auditor of financial statements, I quickly learned that preparing them was actually something that I was not very good at and actually did not quite understand. So I think it was a quick dose of reality when I first joined the Harris organization. And actually, it was at Harris where I started to learn how to, so we refer to it as capital deployment, so how to deploy capital. Actually, so when I took my sort of 7 years at Deloitte, I had not done much in the way of M&A at all. So basically, I sort of came fresh into Harris and the Constellation family at the time, and really it was Constellation. So Mark Leonard and Bernie Anserth and the Constellation board that sort of coached and mentored me over the years how to do it. And then I would say I just learned from the school of hard knocks and hands-on experience, because so the Harris organization, we've done over 150 acquisitions. So again, lots of sort of hands-on learning in experience. And over the last 5 years, I've also been investing some of the word we use at Harris, or one of our acronyms is TEA. So it stands for time, energy, and attention. I'm always sort of working with our leaders to make sure they understand where they're spending it, how they're spending it, and perhaps how they can get a higher return on their T. So anyways, I spend some of my T now actually working with private equity. So really to understand, how they think about capital deployment, how they think about operating their businesses and really creating value both for the businesses and clearly for their limited partners. So I have a very good working relationship with TA Associates, and so basically, I've been able to sit on some of their portfolio company boards as an independent director to sort of get more of a firsthand inside sort of look at how they do it relative to how we do it, which again, we both do the same things, we just do it kind of differently. So that's my background.
That'd be fun to get into in this interview. That's a lot of acquisitions, over 150.
It definitely started off slow. So I would say, zero in the first few years. There's a chart. I don't use it all the time, but if you go back and I can graph for you sort of, the dollars of capital deployed and the number of acquisitions, and it just sort of goes, like 0, 0, 0, and then it's 1, 2, 3. I think in our busiest year so far, I think we hit over 20 in a year. So basically, obviously we're always working on ramping our capacity and our ability to do that. So, but definitely, I mean, it's a big part of what we do.
From what I understand, Harris is an operating group under Constellation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Harris is definitely one of the 6 operating groups. There's been 6 for a while now. So again, I call them my sisters. So there's Harris, the group that I'm responsible for. We have Valeris and Jonas and Vela and Perseus, and then some people would also be familiar. It used to be called TSS, now we call it Topicus, and actually we just spun Topicus out as its own publicly traded company. So we still consider it to be an operating group, but it technically actually is its own public company as is Constellation. So with no offense meant to any of my CSI colleagues, when I always explain to people sort of how the Constellation structure works, I like to say that all of the magic actually happens in one of these 6 operating groups, because really it's the operating groups that have all of the employees, all of the customers, all of the products and solutions. So all of the businesses reside in one of these 6 operating groups. They're all very autonomous. So again, decentralization and autonomy are sort of core tenets within the CSI culture, and correspondingly the cultures of each of the operating groups. So the head office itself, I would say, is probably use the word lean, efficient. Again, not a lot of individuals there, and really their focus is to support the operating groups. I think as it relates to our deployment of capital, best practice sharing, they do a good job of getting us to get together and to share that. And then they do sort of some of the high level financing and obviously the governance related to being a publicly traded company. So I would say most of the business is in one of the operating groups, and then you have this group of very talented professionals at the CSI level that are sort of helping us be successful.
And more financial support, if anything.
Yeah, financial, legal. I think not really strategic, because I think really I'd say more the board level is more focused on, again, capital deployment. Again, what are our hurdle rates? How are we thinking about it? Are they comfortable with the opportunities that we're bringing forth in terms of deploying our capital?
What kind of deals do you typically do?
I do need to correct you, only because again, I'm going to be sharing this internally with our Harris leaders. So we don't do deals. So we make investments. This is a pet peeve of mine. So basically, I think a lot of people refer to them as deals. I like to call them investments or transactions. And really, I think the difference for us, and I think the reason I I call people out on it and try myself not to use the word, is really, I think it starts to tie back into our buy and hold forever. And really, one of our core focuses is once we have a business, we're very much focused on making sure we operate it to the best of our ability and make it the best business that it can be. So again, we make investments as perpetual owners of these businesses. So we would do both platforms and tuck-ins. I would say we're agnostic as to what they are. We do both. I think if you were to numerically add it up, we probably do more tuck-ins than we do platforms. Typically platforms tend to be a bit larger. I mean, obviously the larger the opportunity, I think, we're known as value buyers. So I think, we're probably a little bit less competitive, the larger the opportunity. So, our opportunity, to get into large platforms is probably limited. Whereas, tuck-ins, we tend to be more successful there. But I'd say we're happy to do both. I think, the one thing I think some people find surprising is we're quite happy to have a large number of small businesses. So, we're not very much focused on synergies that come from size. That's not something that not that we don't believe that they can exist. We just don't believe that's where the value is created. We believe value is created by keeping your employees and your customers and your focus on smaller groups of customers and markets. So again, we might actually even buy companies that compete with one another and actually keep them separate. We don't always even combine them to try and create a larger entity. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. The Harris Group, we've used that a couple different times. We call it customer choice. So sort of taking to your customer a number of different solutions and letting them decide which solution best meets the set of criteria that they've laid out in terms of the decision that they're making. So we really would do a high volume of what most people would consider to be a small number of investments. So again, high volume, but not necessarily, we're not doing, typically $billion transactions. We're doing lots and lots of small transactions.
It's interesting. I gave the example of competing products, but you still let them operate independently. Which I feel
it can be definitely challenging for sure. In our utilities group, we first experimented with it. I mean, almost not really by design. I think as we were looking to acquire. So a typical strategy or reality for us is once we get into a vertical with an investment, we then become very, very sort of acquainted with what else is going on there. And then because of our acquisitive nature, we're always looking then to build from that initial starting point. So we did that in utilities, which is sort of the foundation of the Harris business when it was first founded back in actually 1976. And we were ended up buying a number of our competitors, and there was obviously market overlap, some market, I would say, specialization or focus, but some overlap. And we actually just decided to keep them separate, because basically when you took a deep dive into what was happening in the market and you looked at all of the win rates and who was winning, it wasn't clear that one solution was actually any better than the others. It was really about the customer going, well, in this case, this is what I'm looking for. And we thought we would actually get more market share and create a stronger group of businesses by actually keeping them separate. My biggest fear when we did that was that we would drive innovation out of the business, that we would not become, or we would lose some of our innovative capacity. And I would say actually over the course of time, it's been the exact reverse. Like we were super innovative. The groups, they even though they compete, they still share, ideas and knowledge. It's been a very interesting way to go. So I think again, it was a good learning for us to be able to not be afraid to experiment with different types of business models, or even integration approaches as we're buying businesses. It's not always just bring it in, tuck it into something bigger and create something bigger. We're actually quite happy to keep small things, again, very focused on their markets.
Well, between doing a platform and a tuck-in, how's the approach different? It seems like with a tuck-in, there's an element of working with the existing management team on that transaction.
Yeah, so I would say, like most acquisitions, I think, everyone, even though they all have similarities, they're all unique. And I think, again, given our sort of our appetite for doing acquisitions, and given our buy and hold forever and our commitment to our markets, we're super flexible on what the seller, in most of our cases, that would be the owner manager, is looking to do. So again, it really depends on, is it a platform where obviously, we don't keep a bench of executives just kind of like waiting for us to do acquisitions. We typically are reliant upon, a founder, or, it could be the management team, that founder has, built and developed over time. So again, it's very dependent on, is it going to be a platform? So, what does that look like? Or if it is a tuck-in, certainly, obviously, we're going to leverage our existing management team. But that could be a great opportunity for the owner manager who perhaps, has a passion and a strength. I would say, I call them superpowers and kryptonite. Superpower, perhaps for sales, perhaps it's for product development, to return to their roots and spend all of their time doing the things that they actually love and are great at, versus sort of sometimes, as your company grows and grows and grows, you have to spend a lot more time dealing with, people and customers and things that you don't necessarily want to do. So we give them that opportunity to potentially return sort of to their roots, and sort of, extend their career further out into the future.
Also extending their life.
Absolutely, exactly, yeah, for sure. Or again, if they're looking, to move on to their next chapter, or perhaps, in a lot of cases, I would say a lot of the companies that we purchase, this is the monetization event for this owner manager, and basically they're going to move into their next chapter, which is likely some sort of retirement chapter. Could be, still doing advisory services or board work, but it's sort of not in a non-operating capacity. So again, we're more than happy to facilitate, their ability to do that, and we try and take care of the baby that they've created, and the child that they've raised, because again, they tend to have a lot of passion for their employees and their customers and their solutions. And again, we try to be able to sort of let them know that we're going to take good care of what they've created.
Yeah, it seems like I've seen that before, in a lot of these founders fall in one of those two camps. Either, hey, I want to get alleviated from a lot of the pressure of all the effort and ownership, versus they might just be a builder, and that's what they want to do, is go on to the next thing to build. So
yeah, we have a couple of great examples of founders of smaller companies that we purchased. Actually, the first company that I was in charge of sort of acquired, that that I sort of found and nurtured and closed. He is actually one of our group. We call them group presidents now, basically running a multi-$100 million portfolio. And I think the company that we purchased back in 2002 was, I think, less than $1 million in revenue.
wow.
Yeah, and the other actually, I was speaking to one of our leaders this morning before our call. Actually, and we just moved him to the United Kingdom. So we bought his business. He stayed for a little while. Then he quit on me. He called me one day and said, "Jeff, I can't do this anymore. Like I don't have enough control. I'm not enjoying it." He went off and did some other entrepreneurial things, and then I think realized perhaps the grass wasn't as green on the other side, and came back and sort of has continued to sort of move his way up in senior management, and now is again having a next chapter, leading a bunch of our businesses over in the United Kingdom.
I gotta ask, the volume of deals that your organization does, how do you typically source these deals?
The bulk of our sourcing, I would say, would fall into two categories. So we have a team, a group of business development professionals that basically are, on the phone daily, calling out to prospective owners and managers to initiate a conversation or to maintain a relationship. So we would call that nurturing. So we have this nurturing function. And we're doing this, so at the Harris level, we're doing that in the thousands. At the Constellation level, where we're doing that in the tens of thousands. So basically, again, just this army of professionals who basically are just making sure that we understand where the company is in their development, in their life cycle, in their thinking, in terms of what might be important. And I think we're just as much as I think we would want them to sort of say when it's time for them to look at a transaction, to only bring us to the table. I think I try and say I'm a bit more realistic and kind of say I just want them to think about us. So again, I love it to be sole source, but in today's day and age, with the amount of capital that's flowing in the markets today, that's not necessarily a realistic expectation. But as long as they allow us to be part of the process where we can again put our value proposition on the table and perhaps be able to do something. So I'd say that's the main way that we do it. And then a bunch of our senior leaders beyond our professional business development group, they also would maintain handfuls of relationships over the course of time. I remember one of the companies that we acquired, it's probably be like a decade ago, but I had the relationship for a decade with this CEO, constantly just talking, having dinner at trade shows until it was time, or he was ready to sort of to transact. So that's very typical of what we do. I'd say the average, we track lots of statistics and data. The average time that we would have identify a prospect and then sort of move to a transaction or make an investment could be upwards of 4 to 5 years.
Wow.
So again, this is that's why we call it nurturing, because this is not something that you're doing. So we're not just sort of speed dialing looking for someone who's ready to sell. We're really trying to build out a relationship and an understanding of the markets that we're in, and just again positioning ourselves to be again at the table when the transaction happens. So that's number one. Number two then would be, we definitely also understand the dynamics of brokers and advisors. So I would say we spend a fair bit of time doing, just like we will nurture an owner manager, we will also nurture and develop relationships with, again, advisors and brokers to make sure they understand what markets we're in, what types of businesses we look at, what we're currently looking to do. And I would say that I think most brokers and advisors, they don't always love the price that we're willing to pay, because I think, as I said before, we're value buyers. But what they always appreciate is our ability to get a transaction done, right? So again, if we're at the table, that we have the capability, we have the financial wherewithal to actually get a transaction closed. And obviously, if you're a broker or advisor, you're in the business of getting transactions done. So basically, I think that's a super strength that we have. And then we spend a little bit of time, I would say, the third sort of sourcing is we've had some great success over the years, what we refer to as corporate carve-outs. So basically, large entities that they could be software entities. A lot of times they're not software focused entities, but over time they end up either thinking they want to be in the software business, perhaps they've acquired something else and they've acquired some software assets. And usually over the course of time, if they're not really into software or they've acquired software assets that aren't core, there comes a time when they're willing to get rid of those assets, and we like to be there ready to do that, because again, we can do the transactions, again, very quickly. We understand what they're looking for, and again, we feel that we're a good home, where they're not going to end up in the paper with the buyer having done something terrible to the business they're just disposed of. So basically, we take good care of these businesses that we're able to buy. So I say those are the sort of the three main ways that we source our investments.
To do M&A on scale, you got to do business development on scale. We talked about having the team that's actually doing a broad outreach, sort of keeping tabs on companies and nurturing those relationships, because it's not an impulsive decision to go sell your company. And you mentioned it takes upwards of 4 or 5 years
Yep.
for that to actually happen. Then your management team is actually networking and keeping some of those relationships as well over time, and keeping that depth of networking, also developing your network of advisors and brokers, and then also looking at the opportunities from large corporations that may be potentially carving out businesses that you could then acquire.
No, that describes it perfectly. Sometimes it's a great combination sometimes of a business development professional with one of our, let's call it, business leaders or business professionals, because again, you can have such a rich conversation about, again, what we're seeing in the market, because typically, there's similar markets, some of the challenges, that we're having or that they're having. It, can be a differentiated conversation than just an acquisition money conversation, because we can talk about some of the same things that are important to the owner manager. So we try and also make sure that we bring the right people to these conversations. Being able to talk about how they would fit within the broader Harris or Constellation organization. Is typically top of mind for these sellers.
Again, going back to volume and scale, what's your valuation approach look like?
Yeah, it's nothing fancy. So we're discounted cash flows. I think the discounted cash flows with we use after tax, with the assumption though that we own them forever. So again, we're not playing sort of terminal value games or making sort of wild assumptions after 3 years or 5 years. Basically, we're building out very long-term models in terms of the way we look at it. Our board sets for us the hurdle rates that we need to achieve. Typically now they're geared based on size of the business. So again, depending on what the size is, there would be a different hurdle rate that we need to model to. We do use First Chicago. So basically, this means we create 4 independent scenarios of what we think would happen. So again, we have a winner scenario, we have a modest win, we have a walking wounded, and then we have a wipeout. And then we probability weight those scenarios, and then basically come up with a weighted average or an expected value. So again, that might be a little bit different than what some people do. Still all geared around discounted cash flow, though. There's nothing sort of special about that. And then given, so I said Harris has done over 150. Constellation, I must admit I've lost track of the number, over 600 acquisitions right at the Constellation level. So a few years ago, we started using our own data. So actually, we make quite extensive use of base rates. So basically, we can, on a number of metrics, we understand, what similar businesses that we've already purchased, how they've performed, again, relative to these metrics. And then you can take the existing investment that you're proposing and the thesis that you're proposing to put forward or to execute upon, and you can actually graph it again against the base rates. And you can kind of go, wow, I'm proposing that this business will be in the top quartile or the top 95 percentile of any business ever bought by Constellation. Does it have the same characteristics? Or perhaps maybe my modeling needs to be, we should relook at some of the assumptions that we put in our modeling. So again, we make quite extensive use of base rates as well, which again is probably a little bit different than some other organizations, because again, we have the volume, we have the scale to be able to do that. So we try and do that.
Take multiple views, really get comfortable with the transaction and what the potential is, then you just sign off and go at it, or is there a formal approval process?
Yeah, so it depends on, again, it's all geared right now on size. So again, again, some again, because the operating groups are fairly autonomous. I mean, just what I do at Harris is not necessarily what my peer would do at Valeris, as an example. So in our organization, so basically currently now, I have approval myself up to a certain dollar value. Above that dollar value, it has to go to Constellation. So in this case, it would just be the CIO, which is Bernie, and Mark would typically take a look at it. Above a certain volume or value, sorry, then it goes to the board of directors. So they would actually require their approval. And then within the Harris organization, I have also provided dollar value, we call them hunting licenses, to some of our senior capital deployers who've done it many times themselves, that they don't need my approval, that I will look at after the fact and provide comments so they can basically do it. So again, this is all helping to try and again operate at scale, because again, we're doing a large number of transactions. You've got to be able to sort of have a flow of how it works. So again, that's typically sort of how it works. And then as we grow, we just keep adjusting the dollar values, as time sort of goes by. So I mean, the dollar value now that the CSI board looks at is larger than it was 5 years ago. The dollar value that I'm allowed to approve is higher than it was, right? And it just slowly sort of marches forward in time.
So you don't get 5 blank checks mailed to you once a quarter?
I do not get 5 blank checks mailed me to me per quarter, but yeah, we're a very disciplined, rigorous group. We take our capital deployment very, very seriously. Our compensation system at the senior level is driven around return on capital employed. Because we don't sell our businesses, you can't get rid of, if you've done something and it hasn't worked out, like it is in your capital base forever. So we just use those as story. We just use them for storytelling. So we basically, we have our stories. We have great stories, and we have great stories and great stories. We have great stories that have given us great returns. We have great stories that have given us horrible returns. And we like to share them both with everybody, right? To basically make sure that, we don't repeat the same mistakes, and trying to, accelerate the learning. We have learned it's challenging, I think, for people to learn from others' mistakes without having made the same mistake themselves. I think we could find a way or a system to leverage that better. I think that would help us scale faster. It honestly just, people believe, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I understand that turned out poorly last time, but my situation's different. Or it's just a little bit different enough that I don't need to. And I think, again, we haven't quite found the super recipe card, I think, to get people to do it. So again, we share lots of learnings, we share best practices, we do all of those things. But if I was to stand back and look at it, people still seem to have to live the pain to actually go, oh, right, I don't want to do that again, right?
How to own your results.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the way it's the way it goes. But again, obviously, as you're scaling the organization, we want to make sure that we have opportunities for people to learn where it doesn't cost a lot of money. So we're not doing this on big capital deployments. You're trying to let them sort of learn on smaller deployments so that they build up their skill set and their experience set and their repertoire, so that as they get to do larger and larger ones, they have a better foundation on which to deploy.
Have you guys found good ways to share lessons learned across your org?
Yeah, again, we do a lot of sharing across Constellation. We do a lot of sharing like within the groups. Is it great? Is it perfect? No. Constellation, we put on an M&A conference every year. We have hundreds of people attend, and we have all kinds of breakout sessions again on lessons learned and how to do this well. So we do that. We do it for M&A. We're actually also there's one coming up next month on organic growth. So again, we sort of the two lenses. We deploy capital. We also operate our businesses. We do that on help people understand how they could drive higher levels of organic growth. So we sort of bring people together, we share best practices, we create content where we share it. I would say the best process we have, although sharing is still, I think, somewhat complicated, back to my comment on people seem to have to learn from the experience themselves, is we have a process that was created by Mark at Constellation a few years ago called a PAR, so a post-acquisition review. We typically do this about a year after we've completed the acquisition and we've operated the business, and we sit down. Actually, I actually sat through one yesterday, and we just go back through all of our major assumptions that we made during diligence, and we sort of say, what did we learn? Did we make a good assumption? If we did, what did we learn from it? In a lot of cases, did we make a bad assumption? Why did we make that? Why at the time were we comfortable making that assumption, or what did we do to validate it that perhaps wasn't well thought out? And then we try and share those learnings out with everyone else. We also have a checklist. So basically, if you're proposing an acquisition within the Harris organization, and you're preparing, so we have a financial model that we prepare using this first Chicago modeling, as I explained. We also prepare an investment memo, typically just in PowerPoint. There's also a checklist that we ask people to go through to also just sort of continually make sure that they're not doing making like almost like silly or stupid mistakes. So sort of you try and squeeze that part of it out. It doesn't necessarily help you with really bad theses or just pure mistakes in diligence, but it definitely gets you to start to tighten up, and again adds that rigor to the process, which again is very important for us when you're operating at scale. So we have a checklist. I mean, we're constantly updating it. I can't remember how many items it has on it now, quite a few. And we just ask the person who's signing off on the investment to go through and actually just sort of initial that they've actually considered, or it wasn't appropriate, all of these different items, which just kind of remind you, sort of saying, if let's say one of our theses or our return levers was we were going to increase some pricing on the maintenance price on the maintenance contracts. Well, did you review? Are there any contractual caps? Right. So again, something that or is it a timing issue? Right. Where have you put it in the model at a time that doesn't coincide properly with contract renewal? Because again, these are all sort of lessons learned in the past that we don't want to sort of repeat in the future, and you sort of get them to go, oh, yes, I did, or oh, let me go back and make sure I did that. So you try and sort of squeeze out some of the more simpler things. Like I said, it doesn't help you on the super complicated things, but it helps you on some of the simpler stuff. So PARs, checklists, reviews. I mean, typically we have lots of people with lots of capital deployment experience. So again, if you're proposing an acquisition, it has to go through a couple levels of review. Then I'll spend some time with it. Again, if it's larger, it'll go up to, people like, Bernie or Mark, who have obviously, extensive experience. So you're able to get a lot of feedback on things that you should think about, or have you think about.
So a really interesting multifold strategy between doing the events, having these resources or essentially artifacts for people to reference, doing postmortems on your deals, having peer reviews. So, got some checks and balances in place.
We have some checks and balances, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's, like I said, it's a very, again, disciplined and rigorous process. But again, like it's so much a part of what we do that it's no different than if you went into one of our businesses and you sort of looked at all of the operating things that they do. It's a very similar playbook on the capital deployment side, because again, it's not like we're doing onesie twosies over the years. We've done over 600, and fast forward 3 years from now, we'll do another 600. Like, I mean, we're not stopping. So again, like it's a core part of our DNA in terms of what we do.
We move along through the deal and get into diligence, and this is where I see large strategics will heavily rely on internal functional leads, and private equity will have a myriad of consultants that they'll leverage. What's your approach look like?
Yeah, so we're pretty much self-sufficient, although I must admit, partly coming from my experience working with private equity and sort of again, just sort of seeing a different way of doing the same thing, I find quite interesting. So mostly, we have our own internal legal resources. Again, so we have a team of internal lawyers, so we kind of control our own process that way. We definitely bring in external lawyers to the extent, if we're looking at something, unique. Certainly, if we're entering foreign geographies, we would typically always be, partnering up with a legal firm in a different country. The core business diligence and modeling is probably 95% done by internal Harris or even Constellation resources. So basically a combination of our full-time M&A professionals. So again, like I explained, we have these full-time business development professionals. We have a team of full-time M&A capital deployment professionals. So they're the ones in the data room doing the diligence, doing the analyses, preparing the investment memos, building the model. So we do it internally. We'll also involve business leads or resources. Again, if we're already in the vertical or in the space and we think they can help us, whether it's refining the strategy, understanding the market, understanding the competition, understanding the feature and function set of the product. We might involve one of our technical sort of R&D experts if we're trying to understand the tech stack and sort of we're concerned about technical debt or something like that. And then we're starting to, I think, experiment a little bit more with using some external professionals. So I think sometimes speed can be an issue. So basically, if we're trying to get something, say the seller, certainly, we don't buy a lot from private equity, but we will sometimes, buy some of our companies from there. Their expectation, is to move very quickly, and sometimes I think internally we're not as fast as we need to be. And so I think there we're willing to supplant some of our internal expertise and resource with a little bit of external consulting support. So I'd say we're starting to sort of scratch a little bit more at bringing in some external professionals if we think they could sort of help us speed up the process, or just bring a set of expertise that we may just not have internally. So, but I'd say 95% internal, maybe 5% external. If we go into a new market or a new geography or a new vertical, we typically will always do a fair bit of work to try and understand the market a little bit more, because again, we don't bring it with us. So therefore, we want to make sure we're understanding. One of my pushbacks on our diligence teams all the time is, the owner said is not diligence. Like, you can't just ask what the Kison say, like that's not, just because he said it doesn't mean like that's not diligence. Like, you need to be, it's fine to listen to him or listen to you, but then you got to go and basically validate that with actual real external data. So whenever we go into new markets and new geographies, we try and reach out to external experts or professionals to try and make sure we understand the dynamics of the market that we're about to enter.
So it sounds like finance, legal, it's essentially centralized for your group, but across the platforms, do they have their own HR function? Or I'm just trying to get a sense, if you like HR, IT, is that sort of centralized in the group to support all the businesses and you utilize those resources, or are you pulling them from within the business?
Yeah, so again, it could vary by constellation operating group. So again, constellation, again, back to this autonomy and sort of decentralization and sort of control at the op group level. So again, just because I choose to do it one way doesn't mean that one of my peers, they might do it, slightly differently. And they do some things differently. So we definitely operate with a centralized G&A model. So we basically, finance, payroll, HR, legal, and IT are centralized services that are provided to our businesses, and then obviously provided to our M&A function from this central group of resources. Like right now, we've grouped all of the Harris businesses into sort of four, let's call it four larger groups. So a lot of that provisioning is at this group level. So each group is a couple $100 million. So there's it's provisioned there. And then as we get more geographical, I would say you're getting a bit of a geographic overlay as well, because obviously, doing, if we're in Israel or if we're in the UK, if we're in Australia, you have to have some local expertise. You can't necessarily just have sort of one head office, again, we're Canadian, in Ottawa doing everything. So we tend to have our professionals sort of spread out among sort of across the world. Like when we buy a company, even though we centralize the functions, we'll often keep the G&A professionals that were at the company. They just sort of join our greater corporate team and either provide services to the business as they were before, or perhaps to additional businesses, right? So it's all about capacity and scale. We're always looking for great people. So if we find them, we try and find homes for them as opposed to exiting them from the business. So
Yeah, really unique structure. I'm trying to even imagine how you're communicating with thousands of people across all these different businesses while still maintaining this centralized structure for the support of them.
yeah, I would say that communication is definitely more challenging. Today we have over 6,000 employees. So I would say it's not even just the number of employees that makes it challenging. I would say we have geography issues now. We have language issues. A lot of our employees don't speak English. Like they don't. Like that is not their first language or their second language. And we also have, so many different verticals that, again, how you communicate, what you communicate on can also be different. So I'm a fan of like multiple communication channels. So again, I try and use lots of them and really let the employee pick and choose which ones they like, which sort of suits their, their preference. I do use email. I mean, as much as it's the old standard, I still send out, company-wide emails. They just go out in lots of different languages, not written by me, translated from my starting English. I have also a lot of subgroups. So basically, again, communication with lots of subgroups. So again, I send out an email every Tuesday morning to everyone involved in our capital deployment process. It basically has a number of, again, statistics and data, and again, encouragement to, again, to be doing certain things, again, that I feel we should be doing, and maybe we're not doing them as well as I would like us to do them. Every Friday, I send out an email to all of our senior leaders with, I sort of give them things I like them to think about over the weekend. Typically also sharing best practices. So again, if I've talked to a leader during the week and we've talked about a best practice, I'll put a link or a document to, again, a best practice that may or may not be relevant to them. So we sort of have that cadence of communication. Every 6 weeks or so, I send out what I call a food for thought. So I call it like a newsletter. It sort of looks like a newsletter. So this is just a number of articles and books and podcasts or other media that I've been consuming. I'm a sort of a voracious reader that I think might be useful to people. So actually, I rate the books. So I give them, I have a 5-star rating system. So I rate them and sort of, give you a little sense of what the book's about. And then perhaps, right, if that's of interest to you, you can go do that. COVID has been, it's been, challenging in many aspects, but one of the good things is we're creating so much more content now. So we're recording almost, I would say everything, but we're recording a lot more of the content that we were not recording before. So we do a good job of, recording, all of the presentations that I'm giving internally, that I'm giving externally, and we're making those available for people to watch. As you and I were chatting before we kicked off the podcast, I have my own little, nothing compared to yours, little mini podcast series where I try and interview Harris leaders, and again, just give people across Harris a different understanding of, where these, what's their background, what have they done, what does their career look like. The last one that we did, actually, that was the one I was the most uncomfortable for. So we did one on inclusion and diversity. And so we had four of our different leaders really sharing their stories of inclusion and diversity, both at Harris and some other experiences. So again, I think just trying to share with our employees, different ways of looking at things and how we're thinking about different things. And I haven't used, they created for me this, I call it this quirky little avatar that kind of looks like me, that I sometimes use when I'm recording sort of shorter little targeted messages, which actually reminds me, I haven't used him in a while, so perhaps I need to go back and use him. So I would just say it's like you try and use all kinds of different ways that connect with different people for different types of communication. So I would say but I do spend a lot of time thinking about it because, again, with so many employees, obviously I haven't been traveling for quite a while, but I did, the lady that keeps me super organized and make sure I keep my T focused where it needs to be focused. We would actually, at one point, we were counting the number of employees that I got up and spoke to over the course of a year. And I always wanted to make sure that number, basically was at least it needs to be well over 1,000 people. So again, what event am I going to? Okay, I saw 400 people here. I saw 50 people here, just to make sure that we're, I'm constantly communicating with different groups of employees and making sure I don't get too internally sort of focused. The bigger you get, you spend a lot of your time just sort of talking with your very small leadership team versus getting out and speaking with more people. So I try and make sure that I get out as much as I can.
Communication is key to make integration successful. What's your integration process look like, and how are you involved with it?
Yeah, so my involvement is certainly nowhere near what it used to be. I think if I was to be honest, that might be one of the things that I miss the most. That I think in spending more time with our actual business leaders. I think I have more of an operational bend to me. So again, I like getting into the details of businesses. Whereas so before I would very often go on site and do what we call the day one presentation. So we would typically, when we buy a business, very shortly after acquisition, could be day of, just depends, um, get them in a room, walk them through sort of introducing them here. Here's who we are, here's what we stand for, here's what we're all about, and then spend, the day or a couple of days with them, sort of, meeting them and bringing them into the process. I think it's always good to remember that, even though we might have been dealing with the owner and the senior team for months, working through the investment, most employees find out about it on the day of close. And I think, again, they're not part of the process. And I think obviously it can be a very unsettling and anxious time for them. So again, over the years, we've tried to really hone our message down to being very much about the employee and really what they're going through and how can we make that easier for them. So I would say, I probably was terrible because I used to get up and give 3-hour presentations, and you take you through the formation of Harris and Constellation to, our strategy for the business. And, obviously, yes, this is the payroll cycle and the vacation, policies and all this kind of stuff. And then we realized that you really just needed to hone in on the really important things, which is my manager changing? Who is here and who is no longer here? And am I getting paid the same amount of money, and when am I getting paid? And if you're, depending on what country you live in, if you're in the United States, what are you doing to my benefits plan? So now we sort of, we stop with all the other strategy and this and that, and we just get really focused on that. And then, as the days go by, we share more and more as people get more and more comfortable, I think, with what it is we're doing. So the integration process itself, I think, again, it depends on platforms, and tuck-ins would be different. So obviously, if it's a platform acquisition, our process would be slightly different, than if it's a tuck-in. We have a mix of full-time integration professionals, because we're acquiring so much. We have some people like their full-time job is to be an integration manager. So the integration management concept, I guess, so we have an integration manager for every acquisition that we do. Again, sometimes they're full-time employees who that's all they do. We also like the integration management experience. We think is really good as a leadership development tool. So again, we'll often pull people from existing businesses and provide them with the opportunity to be an integration manager, because typically it can be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. So again, it's a sort of a relatively short sort of experience, but it really helps them understand what it's like to be an employee, how we think about acquisitions and that kind of thing. We certainly have, we have again, an extensive playbook, lots of checklists to make sure we don't forget the stupid stuff or the simple stuff, but leave enough room for the agility of, what you need to do. We're fairly, I wouldn't say hands off, but I mean, so obviously, we have a core financial reporting system and a reporting tool that sits on top of that system. This, everybody gets on that system, sort of, as soon as possible. We have one, I would say, HR system, so we use Workday. So again, that's the system that we basically would sort of roll out to all of our employees in all of our businesses. The other systems, I'd say we're if it's broken, we're going to fix it. But I would say we don't basically say everybody will be on this system. What we typically would do is say, here's 5 different CRM solutions that are used across the Harris family. Here are the businesses that use them, and here's the business leaders that could tell you what they like and what they don't like about them. How about you reach out to them and decide for yourself what you think the best right solution is for you. So again, we don't actually mandate a number, most of the systems that are there. And again, if they're not broken, again, there's so much going on in the initial integration that we're not trying to, again, fix things that aren't really working. We try and really focus on fixing the things that don't work. And again, really supporting the employees through that process, because they're the ones that are, again, moving your product forward, engaging with your customers. We want them to feel sort of as supported as possible. So again, we don't typically force changes. And then again, I mean, the final piece I would say is, every investment that we make has a thesis. So you're going to do these things to the business to be able to earn the return that we think we need to earn. And that obviously links right back into our integration to make sure that we're doing those things in the right timeline so that we're able to earn the returns that we forecast to earn. So that might change some of the timing or the cadence around integration.
These are Great rundown of your integration approach. And I particularly like how you prioritize the communication with the employees of the newly acquired company and what's important to them.
Yeah,
What?
so good lessons learned. I think and again, not that these things are always fun, but I think sometimes the reality is if if you buy a company, we might have to part ways with some employees. Whether again it's because we have a corporate group and we don't need those corporate employees, or it's for a different reason. What we learned very quickly was, again, that's really important for the people who are in the room, and they don't know whether, well, is Kison not in the room because he doesn't work here anymore, or is he just at home sick today, or is he, he's busy doing something else? And we never really would talk about the people who aren't there anymore. So now we kind of go, no, we're going to actually acknowledge here are the people who are no longer here. And again, a very, sort of very respectful way, because then you just want to, so people can at least sort of start the process of recovery, right? Because a lot of times these are close colleagues, or they could be friends of the employees who are still staying, and I think you want to be respectful to them of acknowledging what has happened, as opposed to sort of pretending like it doesn't matter, or that we're afraid to talk about it. We're a very, I'd say, straightforward organization, and we really believe in again being respectful, but also hitting the hard truths when they need to be hit, and then sort of starting that sort of recovery process from there.
That's the best.
Again, we believe we own these businesses forever, right? So we just believe it's just part. I mean, we're not going to sell you in 5 years. Therefore, like, you're going to be part of us forever. You might as well understand how we think and how we do things. So,
Really good approach. What are key lessons learned from doing 150 plus deals?
oh my God, key lessons. I think everyone is different. I think so. Again, what we have, again, I think playbooks and checklists and templates. I think this ability to be flexible and be willing to think differently about what it is, I think, is really important. Like understanding the cultural fit, I think, of the senior teams. We probably spend more time on now than we have in the past. Whereas before, I think we would just, if it was for sale and we felt we could get a good return, we're just going to buy it. Now, I think we spend more time understanding the impact on the integration approach. If we think there's going to be sort of challenges culturally in terms of, again, how the businesses, how they operate for stuff. We operate, obviously now we're deploying capital globally. And I think, assuming that every business thinks like North America that's not a good way to do it. So again, trying to adapt ourselves to be flexible to deal with that. So, and again, I think we just share the learnings. Like we share the great success stories, but we're equally willing to share the mistakes. Like I said, we had a 2-hour meeting yesterday on one of these PARs, post-acquisition reviews, and it's mostly focused on here's the 5 things we got wrong. And here's why we got them wrong. Here's what we learned from it. Here's what we would do differently next time. But it's not like the people who were presenting it, like I wasn't attacking them. It's like they wanted to share because they wanted to go again with their peers to explain, what they were thinking, what they've learned, and how they're going to do it differently. So I think creating that culture where you can talk about the things that didn't go well so that you don't repeat them in the past, I think it is a really important for people like us who basically deploy capital for a living.
Yeah, it sounds like it boils down to having that feedback loop and continuous learning type of culture.
I would agree. We definitely, that is our intention. That is absolutely our intention for sure.
Jeff, what's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
Well, I would say that it's more, I guess, maybe funny stories. So we bought an OMS, an offender management system, a business, and we wanted to visit one of the customers and see how the solution worked, which meant we had to go to a prison. My vision when we went was that we would not be spending time with the actual people who were incarcerated in said facility. That actually was not the way that the tour worked. So the tour was basically we were walking around actually with inmates, in between as we were locking the gates with the guards who were giving us the tour. And I remember at one point, I was very curious. I'm a very curious individual, so I wanted to see what it was like to look at the inside of a cell. So the gentleman giving the tour calls up, "Hey, Kison, come down here and take Mr. Bender up and show him your cell." And so like this guy comes down and he basically goes, come with me. And I have to walk up like these sets of stairs and into his cell. And I'm looking kind of back as my group is, we'll meet you down the hallway. As they're walking down the hallway, this guy's showing me his cell. I was trying to learn more about the in-cell technology that they were using. So that I must admit, when we left that, you're like, holy cow, I just spent like, the morning walking around an actual prison. We had one where we had some key executives that had once been married, and I would say perhaps were not fully over their separation, but it did not come up during diligence. So that made for a bit more of a fun integration after the fact.
Wow.
And then one of my peers reminded me that we were doing diligence on a company, and we discovered that one of our full-time employees was also one of their full-time employees. So that led to a very interesting conversation with said employee. So obviously, that was obviously not super pleasant. I would say most of
Wow.
because you're dealing with family dynamics a lot. I would say just lots of conflict between parents and children, brothers to sisters. Just things that because I think when it comes time to sell the companies, it's a very emotional time for them, and you can get caught up in some very difficult, very uncomfortable situations. So again, obviously, we've had our share of those, but the prison one was my favorite.
So all interesting, great stories. Diligence took you to prison.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Over in the UK to boot. Yeah. So they don't even carry guns with them. So that was even more.
Wow.
Yeah. Or sorry. I mean, we were, to be clear with your listeners, it was a low security prison. So it wasn't like we were in with murderers or anything.
That's good.
Yes, it was for me.
Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. I enjoyed this conversation and learned a lot.
All right. Thank you, Kison. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers. Here's to the deal.
All right. Thank you.